Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined today by Kentucky baseball radio play-by-play man, Darren Headrick, to talk about the Wildcats season so far. A lot to talk about. We just joked about before we hit record here that we're learning a whole new team at Kentucky this season, and that's both a joke and very, very true. So we will have a lot to talk about over the next 20 minutes or so. Before I get into that, though, I have to remind you that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Get ready for a new season of fishing fun with Academy Sports and Outdoors and reel in the best gear at low prices every day. Plus, Academy offers easy ways to shop and save time, like free 1-hour in-store or curbside pickup on academy.com orders. I have heard, Darren, that as we record this Thursday, early afternoon, that not exactly fishing weather in Lexington or maybe baseball weather in Lexington for the start of that series against Ole Miss. So my condolences. I hope things end up clearing up.
Yeah, the biggest thing is with all the catastrophic storms and the torrential rains moving through the state, our thoughts are with all those people around the bluegrass. But yeah, hopefully Mother Nature will grant us a window to get these games in against Ole Miss this weekend. It's a big series for both teams.
Well, yeah, let's actually start there. That's a great segue to what I was going to ask you first, which is that it feels like, understanding, of course, that in a 30-game SEC schedule, every game is just so vital, and I think we've really learned that the last couple of years as the league has gotten tougher. But when you consider home series against Ole Miss, midweek game against Louisville after that, home series against Texas in the next, let's call it 10 days, it's hard to imagine a more important stretch of the season for Kentucky than the one we're coming up on.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is an opportunity for them to really cement a resume to put them back in a regional this year, and it's a chance to try to move into that top half of the league. It is amazing to me, Joe, to look at the standings right now and to see the separation already from the top to the bottom. And you look down at the teams behind Kentucky in the standings, and you're like, whoa, Texas A&M, Florida. But Kentucky is playing better baseball, Joe. They're getting better. This weekend series against Ole Miss at home is going to be a good measure of how far they've come. Like you mentioned, Louisville and Texas coming up, and then a trip to Tennessee after that. I really think these next 3 weeks are going to be the swing point, the pivotal point of the SEC slate for the Wildcats.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. It's such a good point you bring up about the striation in the league where you've got these teams at the top and the bottom, and of course Kentucky kind of in the middle. But at the bottom, you guys just got done playing Texas A&M, and every time I watch that team, I understand where some of the issues are. They've been a little banged up, the offense, yada yada yada. But then you see how talented they are, and you're like, man, if that team is 1-8, because they're still showing up to the ballpark, and they're more talented than most teams they face, and yet they're 1-8 in the league. So that's just, I marvel at it all the time. Florida is the same way, right? Like Florida.
Yeah, no question. We talked. Coach Mingione and I talked on his pregame interviews on radio all weekend long about how talented Texas A&M is, and we were able to go down there and win 2 really tough ball games. We dropped a close 2-run game on that Friday, but yeah, that lineup for Texas A&M is scary, and their starting rotation is really good, Joe. I think that's kind of one of the anchors of that team is that weekend rotation, and Kentucky did a fantastic job against all 3 of them last weekend.
All right, let's dive into this Kentucky roster, and let's start with one of the more high-profile names. That's Tyler Bell. Obviously, a lot of excitement about him making it to campus. It's been a while since Kentucky has had a prospect of his caliber make it to campus. Maybe never one of his caliber make it to campus, and yet has he exceeded expectations? Maybe for me, I think he has a little bit, at least offensively.
Yeah, I would agree with that from the standpoint of how hard this league and how tough this league is. And he has held his own at the plate. And for me, it underscores how talented this young man is. Joe, when you look at the game Saturday at Texas A&M, when he had the 4 hits, matching a career high in RBIs, he had a base hit inside the back. Well, easiest way to say it is he had a backside hit from both sides of the plate. Just an incredible job with the bat. He also homered in that game in a big spot when Kentucky needed a run to answer Texas A&M. And yeah, his defense is what he was known for coming out of high school. That has been on display. He's getting smoother with that. And Luke Lawrence, I think, has been a big help to him playing beside him at second base. They lean on each other both. That's a good double play combination. But at the plate, man, he has been really impressive, and he works so hard with Chase Sloan, Nick Mingione, and Austin Cousineau in that group. That is certainly a place. And batting cleanup as a freshman in this league, and he leads the team in RBIs. He's just a phenomenal talent.
When I look at this year's lineup, it feels, well, different because it's new names, but also different in that last year, like, you and I could have pretty much written out Kentucky's lineup every day, right? Like we knew who the nine guys were, and maybe there was some, but we kind of knew who the nine were. This year feels a little different, and that's going to happen when you've got unknown quantities, right? But also, it does feel like the depth is maybe better. I mean, why don't you tell me? Does it feel like maybe this offensive depth is a little bit better than maybe even last year's team? Understanding that the nine last year might be better on aggregate, but it's just the depth.
Sure. No, I think that's a fair statement to talk about the depth of this team. And the lineup has been in flux a little bit as Nick Mingione has experimented with some lineups and some personnel within the batting nine. And then you got to factor in some injuries. They missed Ethan Hindle for a little while. Will Marcy's going to be out indefinitely with an injury. So there goes your opening day starting center fielder. But the lineup they had, the personnel grouping they had at Texas A&M, I really like. It was a versatile lineup. It had power. It had speed. You could move guys up and down the lineup. I mean, plugging in Sean Montoya in that 8 or 9 spot. He tried Luke Lawrence down there, and Luke produced in that bottom half of the order. I really like where that is. Cole Hage is coming off a big weekend. So, yeah, they're showing depth. But the personnel he had against Texas A&M is one that I really liked, factoring in Hudson Brown. And you know what? Griffin Cameron has really held his own, Joe, with coming in for the injured Will Marcy, and he is produced with bunts and getting on base, and obviously he's a terrific talent in center field defensively. But he's come in and produced and held his own too.
I wanted to ask you about Patrick Herrera and his development, because he's such an interesting guy to me. And I'll say this, maybe perhaps so you don't have to. Like, I talked to some folks around the program when he first came in from Northwestern, and he had dealt, I believe, with an illness leading up to that first year in Lexington, so maybe he wasn't quite physically. But also there were concerns that hey, maybe we missed a little bit here. He didn't play much that year. Last year he had a role, but it was a minor role, and this year, like, boom, here he is, kind of a fully formed contributor. I mean, that's just in this era when it feels like there's just not as much development going on in college baseball because of, portal and whatever else. Like, It is still nice for me anyway, kind of a traditionalist. It is nice to have development stories like that with what we see with Herrera this year.
I think we started seeing flashes from Herrera last year. The problem was he was behind Mitchell Daly at third, Grant Smith at short, and Emilian Petrie at second. It was just hard to find time. He even experimented with some outfield last year. And there were moments where he came on as a pinch hitter and produced. I think about a huge run scoring double that he had at Florida to help Kentucky win that series late in the season. But this year he has really blossomed at third base. He's got several nicknames on the team: Patty Fitz, Patty Picks. He's got different Instagram accounts. Started calling him Patty Sports Center after making the top 10 for that diving stop play that he made over at the hot corner. So he has flashed great leather at third base this year. And that bat, Joe, I feel like the bat has always been consistent for Patrick. You knew what you were going to get. And he's producing again this year, high batting average, driving in runs. But you're right, he has turned into a well-rounded player and a huge contributor to the lineup this year.
Gosh, it strikes me too with him in the lineup. Obviously, Tyler Bell. You mentioned Luke Lawrence. I thought last year it was such an advantage. Last 2 years, really, been such an advantage that Kentucky has had basically 3 shortstops on the infield. It feels like that again this year. Obviously, maybe none of them are Grant Smith in terms of just, you can set your watch to that consistency. But man, what an advantage when you've got that level of just athleticism on your infield, that sure-handedness.
It's funny you mentioned that, because against the Aggies this past weekend, Luke made some plays. There was a stop up the middle where he threw a guy out at first. He made some catches of line drives. Some of that was great positioning by the coaching staff to know where to stand defensively and defend the percentages. But a lot of that, too, was just the talent of Lawrence. But what I was going to say is it's funny you mentioned that, because Luke made some plays that reminded me of some of those outstanding plays that Grant Smith made on the other side of the second base bag, going into the outfield to run down a fly ball or a line drive or making a terrific throw. It's fun to watch Luke as he has really kind of settled into the role and has gotten a taste of baseball at this level in the SEC, and he's comfortable now, and you can tell. And it's just one thing about Nick Mingione's programs, they always play terrific defense, and he's got another infield that's fun to watch this year.
It's been good to see Devin Burks have more success offensively.
Yeah.
Last year he was in the lineup for pretty much anything but his bat. He just struggled from the jump last year offensively. Felt like he never quite got going, but was such an Iron Man behind the plate. This year he's been dangerous. Is there something that stands out about what has allowed him to be more dangerous in the lineup this season?
Well, obviously his experience helps there because he's seen just about everything. But to me, the biggest thing is he's sharing the catching load this year. Like you talked about, he was the Iron Man behind the plate last year. Even when he was injured, he was behind the dish and wanted to be there catching for his pitching staff. This year, he gets to share that load with Rafael Peltier. Peltier is a terrific receiver and catcher. I mean, he is top notch behind the dish. And so they've been starting Raf in some instances, and I think that's helped. It's kept Devin fresher, it's kept the legs under him, and we're seeing that power return in the bat, and just I think he's just got more energy. I don't know if he would want me to say that, but I think it's helped sharing the catching load this year.
Devin Burks with more energy. That's hard. Even last year, with as much of an Iron Man as he was, energy didn't seem like an issue. That's exactly right. Last thing on the position player side before we talk about the mound. One thing that's kind of struck me watching this team is maybe you're like me, and as you've watched this team, you're kind of reminded of how good Kentucky has had it the last couple of years, because not just were they talented, they also had just an enormous baseball IQ. The chemistry was better than anything I've really seen in college baseball. Like, there were just so many things going for them. And while this group is also very talented, like, I have to imagine there have been moments where you've been watching and like, oh, that's a play that probably gets made last year, or hey, that's a mistake that doesn't get made last year. And that feels like that's still an area where like this team could actually get a little bit better as time goes on.
Yeah, I agree with that. This team has some things to clean up, and I think about, there was that stretch there where they against Murray State and Auburn the week before where they lost 3 games. They could have easily been 4-0 that week. But there were some things where they didn't quite make a play to turn a double play, or they didn't quite make a catch in the outfield. And then on the bases, they got picked off a few times, or they got too aggressive and were thrown out taking an extra bag. One thing about Nick Mingione's style, though, is they're always going to be aggressive. They want to play with brains and guts. That's what he always says. And sometimes that aggressiveness, the other team's going to make a play. And I credit Murray State. They made some terrific plays in that. I think it was a 5-4 win at Kentucky Proud Park. And Auburn made some big plays too. But you're right. There are some things to clean up. I think some of it is these guys are trying so hard to get in there and win these games and perform well. And then some of it too is first year in the system. So they're still trying to get used to, okay, when is the right time to go? How aggressive do I need to be in this moment? But you know what? At the end of the day, I always love how aggressive this team is offensively. And there are times where the defense is going to make a play.
Yeah, if you're going to lose games playing your game. That's kind of right. I think the motto there. We are going to move on to the mound here in just a second, but first one more ad read for you, and that's for Tecovas boots. Whether it's the leather in your glove or your tailgating chairs, baseball people know that quality matters. That's why we love Tecovas boots. Born in Texas, just like yours truly, handcrafted with over 200 meticulous steps and comfortable from day one. They're perfect for wherever the college baseball season takes you. From road trips to rivalry games, post-game celebrations, or just everyday wear, Tecovas boots are made to go the distance. Find your perfect pair today at Tecovas. Let's start here on the mound, Darren. What words would you use to describe how good Ben Cleaver has been this season for the Wildcats?
How about we just use his nickname, the Slim Reaper?
I love it. So good.
He has been phenomenal. And we saw flashes of it last year, Joe. It was unfortunate for Ben. Last year, it was sort of an injury season, trying to get healthy. And there were times where he came in out of the bullpen. I think about the save at Florida. That's when he really flashed. what kind of a competitor he is on the mound and how he's not afraid to go on the attack. I'd love to have seen him get that midweek role last year to really develop as a starter, but instead, here he is thrown to the fire this year in that weekend rotation, and he's been phenomenal. I think he's a stopper when this team has needed to win a game to force a rubber match, or as in the case of Texas A&M, needing a win to take the series. Ben has been the guy, and I just feel like with where he is right now, Joe, if Kentucky needs to win a game tomorrow to advance in a postseason, Ben's the guy I want starting on the mound. His stuff plays well. The arm slot, the breaking pitches are special. The changeup is a special pitch, and he's only going to get better from here, and that's the exciting part.
Yeah, totally agree. Love watching him pitch. He's just one of the guys that, for whatever reason, aesthetically, I like watching him pitch. Like maybe it's I think the pitch mix has something to do with it, where he's
Sure.
he's able to lean on the secondaries. How would you evaluate the rotation around Cleaver? That's primarily been McKay and Walker.
Yeah, I think it's still something that they're developing with. And I've tried to remind fans here, like, it is hard when you lose your entire weekend rotation and have to replace them. And, I think Nick is getting better. I thought after that first inning against Texas A&M, he really settled down. The biggest thing for Nick is just landing strikes, getting ahead 0-1, 0-2, and commanding the at bat. There's been times where he's fallen down early 1-0, 2-0, and then he's had to battle back. So I'd like to see the pitch efficiency get better, but his stuff is terrific, and he's got that experienced veteran demeanor on the mound. The rest of the rotation has been kind of in flux. I understand Nate Harris is going to start game one this weekend. He's shined as a midweek starter this year for the team so far. And, Scott Rouse got a turn as a starter against Texas A&M. And I thought Scott gave that club a chance to win that ball game last Friday night. So they're moving some guys around. They like Ethan Walker. I think he's got good stuff. Just trying to continue building the confidence of this staff. There's times where, and it's not just specific to this year's team, Joe, I think there's times where teams or maybe individuals don't realize how good they are, how good their stuff is. But once that clicks, you go to another level. And that's where they're trying to get right now with this pitching staff. They got good stuff. Just be confident and command it. Pitch like a champion, as Dan Roselle likes to say.
Yeah, it's such a good point you bring up about the confidence piece, because you can have all the confidence in the world pitching at Longwood. And I don't mean that disrespectfully, Longwood. It's a lower level. And then you get up here in the SEC and somebody's 9-hole hitter can take you opposite field out of the park, and it's like, so it is easy to get your confidence shaken when you're like, hey, that pitch was a swing and miss last year all the time. And this year it's a laser. So, that's such a good point you make. It's so easy to get rattled in this league.
Yeah, and I think too with the SEC that new pitchers, no matter who they're pitching for, they learn real quick in this league that guys don't chase. To get them out, you have to pitch well from the start of the at bat to the middle to the finish. And just because you're ahead 0-2 doesn't mean they're going to chase that slider in the dirt. And I think that's something that guys are still learning, and they'll get better at as we go along.
Agreed. Let's talk about the bullpen. Darren, do you have a feel for, who does the coaching staff really like right now? Who are their moment of truth guys that they've been leaning on most heavily?
Well, I think you look back to an Evan Byers who has kind of assumed that fireman role that Cameron O'Brien had last year. Evan's already made 12 or 13 appearances this year. Comes in, gets them out of a jam. Jackson Novi's a veteran arm they're leaning on. They got Robert Hogan back this year. It's been a struggle for him. Simon Gregerson is the guy they brought in from Indiana State. Again, great stuff. Just has to put it back together on the mound, and we know he will. He's too talented, and we saw what he could do last year in that regional when he pitched against Kentucky. So they have exciting pieces, super talented arms. And then after that, you start thinking about some of the younger guys. Cole Henschel came in and got some big outs for him, and he's a new face on the team this year. But they have some younger arms that they're starting to mix in there, and as those guys continue to grow and develop, they're really starting to push some of the veterans.
Is there someone on the pitching staff, maybe Gregerson's a great example of this, but who is pitching better than the numbers would maybe lead you to believe? Because you look at the stat sheet and there are some ERAs that Coach Rozelle probably doesn't love, but sometimes that doesn't tell the whole story. Does anyone stand out there for you?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I often say on a broadcast when I introduce a reliever, especially first half of the season, I'll just tell the audience, hey, I'm not going to give you the guy's earned run average because one bad outing spoils that. But in so many innings, he struck out this amount of guys and he's only allowed so many hits. That's what you really need to know about a reliever. There's been times where Gregerson has pitched better than his results. Maybe there was just a squibber ground ball that gets to the infield, or maybe the defense doesn't make a play behind him. That's happened a couple of times. So he's pitched better than some of his performances have underscored. There's a couple of guys on the team like that from early in the season when this team was still rounding into form and kind of getting a feeling out process. It's the biggest thing right now is just cutting down on the walks. And when they've done that, we've really seen the staff and this team take off like against Texas A&M.
Last thing for you, if this Kentucky team is to make a third straight postseason, which we shouldn't lose sight of how big a deal that is for a program that, year over year continues to get more consistent, get better, all that stuff. So I don't want to lose how big a deal that would be. What has to happen? What's kind of your Cliff Notes version of hey, if this is going to happen, this is what is going to have to be at the center of it?
I think the rotation has to continue to get, I don't want to say get better. I just think it has to settle down. I think they need to figure out that right mix of guys on the weekend, in addition to Ben Cleaver. So you kind of look at it right now as, okay, when Ben starts, you kind of want to say, all right, that's the chance to get the one win. Now, how do we get the other two? Scott Rouse and Nick McKay are giving you opportunities as they continue to get better. The bullpen's got to continue to round into shape. Who's going to be the guy in big moments? And by the way, one player I should mention there is James McCoy. Really stepped up this weekend against Texas A&M, and he might become an option in those late innings to get outs. But I like where the offense is. I really do. I mean, again, I can't underscore how impressive it was what Kentucky's offense did to the starters against Texas A&M. Prager and those guys are all really good, tough left-handers, and Kentucky chased all three of them before they could get through five. So, the offense, I like where it is. Just the pitching continue to round into form. I always talk about math when it comes to, okay, what do we got to do to make a regional? It used to be, what do you got to do to get to the SEC tournament? You don't have to worry about that anymore. I feel like if Kentucky can get to that 13 to 15 win range in the SEC, they're going to feel really good about making a regional. And Joe, this league, if you get to 15, a lot of times that means you're hosting a regional. So, if they can figure out how to just continue getting wins. If you can win the series against Ole Miss, figure out a way to win the series against Texas, win one against Tennessee, the math just continues to work in your favor. And I think that's what you have to continue to work towards.
Yeah, I always kind of jokingly, although again, I say jokingly, there's some truth in it, that the difference between a fan base going pitchforks and torches and hosting a regional is like 3 SEC wins.
Right.
Really, it's a pretty narrow band there between a bad situation and something to really be excited about. So that's life in the SEC. It's what everyone signs up for. So that is Darren Headrick, Kentucky Wildcats radio play-by-play voice, one of the absolute best in the league doing what he's doing. Love listening to his call every weekend and catching up on what's happening with the Wildcats. Darren, appreciate you joining us again today.
Joe, thanks as always, my friend. Hopefully we'll have you on our podcast here pretty soon, and look forward to catching up again, maybe in person soon.
Yeah, would love all of that. Certainly game to finish off the home and home on your podcast this season. That is going to do it for this edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. One more thank you to our sponsors, Academy Sports and Outdoors and Tecovas Boots. Another thank you to Darren Headrick for joining us, and thank you, the listeners, for listening. We'll talk to y'all soon.